someone on the radio who's actually one of us.
Being different was a good thing. Reject the status quo.
Reject the status quo is my new life motto.
Embrace your awesomeness. Stand up for who you are. I dare you.
You got fan clubs at every school in Seattle. The whole world will be listening.
We got the beat, we got the beat, we got the beat.
Hello Internet, and welcome to the DCOM review. Today, we'll be taking a closer look at Radio Rebel, one of the movies that just missed the cut for one of my previous videos, the top 5 most underrated DCOMs of all time, which you should totally check out once you're done here. Wink wink nudge nudge. Yeah, so shameless plug aside, this one is definitely an underrated gem of a film, and maybe after watching this review, you'll agree. But if you don't, let's talk about it. That's what comment sections are made for after all. And a quick shout out to Natasha Hall Off the Wall who suggested that I dive into this movie. With all that said, let's dive in to Radio Rebel. So we start things off where else but in high school. We enter at a time where students are absolutely obsessed with a podcast known as Radio Rebel. All that is known about her is that she's also a student at Lincoln Bay High School where the movie takes place, and that her rejection of the status quo is embraced school-wide, outside of the popular kids, naturally. It's an interesting choice from the get-go, as the film places us in a story already in progress, as opposed to potentially building Radio Rebel from the ground up, like a prototypical superhero origin story might do. Debbie Ryan plays the lead here as Tara, alongside her forgettable cast of pals played by people you've probably never seen and will never see again. The overarching dilemma most of the non-popular characters face in this movie is feeling as if they are treated unfairly, and Radio Rebel seems to give them a voice when nobody else seems to want to listen. A pretty potent dose of responsibility. So, who is the mysterious Wonder Girl?
Debbie Ryan is
Radio Rebel.
Radio Rebel.
Radio Rebel.
You didn't see that coming?
What a shocker. We meet the rest of the cast, including Adam DeMarco as Gavin, who would later star in Zapped, and Atticus Mitchell from My Babysitter's a Vampire. And, of course, no DCOM would be complete without the resident mean girl. This time it's Stacy, portrayed by Merritt Patterson. The high school environment intrigues me because it's so interesting how completely sold many of these characters are on status and how important it is. Even their principal gives preferential treatment to the more popular kids. It's a common thing for high school movies, but for me, there's something that really feels different about it this time around. It kind of reminds me of the school from Minutemen, except handled in a slightly more believable way, and with a better supporting cast along for the ride. So we get a speedy backstory on Tara's character and how she ended up as a stepdaughter. Her stepfather, who works at a radio station and needs to boost ratings, hears Tara doing her Radio Rebel show, and he's convinced that she'll bring in the ratings that his station, Slam FM, desperately needs. Radio Rebel's popularity grows and grows over all the schools in Seattle, while most people are still completely in the dark regarding the identity of Radio Rebel. Meanwhile, Principal Moreno continually tries and fails to shut Radio Rebel down. Heck, Radio Rebel even throws a lunchtime dance party, which Principal Moreno legally can't do anything to stop. Radio Rebel's well-paced school takeover also falls in line with a play that Tara, Stacy, and Gavin are all assigned to work on together. Fittingly, it's a tale that parallels exactly what Tara is going through in terms of how she feels about Gavin. What's important to note here is that Gavin listens to Radio Rebel and actually practices what she preaches, right up to the point where being who he is and staying that way causes a fallout between him and the rest of his band. On the other hand, Stacy despises Radio Rebel and is one of the most adamant about figuring out who she is once it becomes known that both her and Radio Rebel are up for prom queen, in the aftermath of Principal Moreno threatening to expel the student responsible for the Radio Rebel podcast. But when that fails to weed out Tara, Moreno goes one step further and cancels prom. It's a pretty devious ploy, all things considered, and it turns the student body against Radio Rebel. However, Radio Rebel gets the idea for Slam FM to host a MORP. It's just prom spelled backwards. Yeah, it's kinda dumb, just go with it. This leads us into Stacy's party, and in the spirit of Radio Rebel, she invites everyone to it, under the assumption that whoever doesn't show up must be Radio Rebel. Which seems like a stretch, considering there's a lot of people in their high school, and most of them didn't actually make it to the party, but whatever. This leads to a pretty clever scene where Tara's mom and one of Slam FM's DJs, known as DJ Cammy Q, has to use pre-recorded voice tracks to imitate an actual Radio Rebel show while Tara is at the party. Of course it works for a bit before falling apart, but eventually Tara saves the day and even does a decent job of covering her tracks. It's there where we get a little bit of insight into Stacy's character, and discover why she's so obsessed with being prom queen. But in all this time, Stacy has had growing suspicions about Tara actually being Radio Rebel. And, for my money, the way she goes about piecing it all together makes her one of the better antagonists in DCOMs. She literally connects all the pieces of information that Tara has relayed to her and uses it to form the undeniable conclusion. And, since few would believe her if she just outright said the shyest girl in school is actually its voice, she has her friend get a recording of Tara's mom talking with DJ Cammy Q just to confirm it. All this while trying and succeeding in breaking the chemistry Tara had started to form with Gavin. And she did all of this just to ensure that she'd be the prom queen. Can you imagine what she'd do if the stakes were actually important? Her plan is more well thought out than Loki's and the Avengers, and they barely stopped him. But Gavin eventually figures out that Stacy was the one that locked Tara in the janitor's closet before their drama presentation and dumps her on the spot. With this movie, Lemonade Mouth, and go figure, DCOMs have this really weird habit of putting their female leads inside janitors' closets, don't they? Kind of a strange trend. So we eventually land on Morp, which looks like any other DCOM dance that you've seen a million times in a million other movies. Radio Rebel is voted as Morp Queen, but is initially hesitant to accept the honor and reveal her identity. She eventually finds the courage to do so, however. This, of course, means that Principal Moreno plans to expel her, but then the entire Morp population proudly exudes I am Radio Rebel one after the other, in an act of solidarity for their classmate Tara. It's, an okay way to resolve everything, but Power Rangers in Space did it better in my opinion.
I am the Blue Ranger. I'm the Black Ranger. I am the Red Ranger.
You can call me the Pink Ranger.
Incredible.
But not a terrible resolution by any means. Stacy, after some reluctance, also proudly admits to being Radio Rebel, which is honestly a better movie moment than the rest of the class saying it. Gavin makes up with the G's, Tara doesn't get expelled, and everyone dances the night away being exactly who they are. And now, the characters. I'll start with this. I usually can't stand Debbie Ryan. I couldn't stand her as Bailey in The Sweet Life on Deck, and she was even more annoying as Jessie. I expected this movie to absolutely blow going into it, and I was definitely proven wrong. And even more surprisingly, Debbie Ryan is probably the biggest reason this movie is great. Think of how the character of Tara grows and develops from the beginning to the end of the movie. Tara and Radio Rebel used to have almost nothing in common, despite being the same person. But by the end of the movie, they truly become each other. This development is so well paced because as the movie progresses, normal everyday Tara gradually gains more and more confidence to express herself and say what she feels. Whether it's being honest with Gavin or telling off Stacy, you can always tell that she's on the path to eventually become more like her alter ego, and the attention to the detail of her character arc is spotless. Additionally, Debbie Ryan turns in a great performance here, probably one of the better performances by a female lead in a DCOM. Sometimes in alter ego movies, the difference is made even larger by overacting the part, but I never feel as if that was ever a problem here, which works even better since the resolution is all about Tara combining both of her identities into one. I touched on it before, but in my opinion, Stacy is one of the best DCOM antagonists ever put on screen. She's mean alright, but more than that, she's very, very smart. She knows what she wants and how to work step by step to achieve it. The kind of manipulative persona you would expect from a popular girl, but with the brains to create a great opponent for Tara while she's trying to keep Radio Rebel a secret. And I love the way they handle her character, especially when she has those real human moments. It's a subtle way to explain how her self-worth feels very much tied to material possessions and winning accolades without her literally having to say, prom means everything to me. In all, Stacy is a great addition to this movie. Gavin begins the movie on the cusp of true popularity, even asking Stacy to the prom, but eventually discovers that being himself and being popular, at least in this school anyway, do not go hand in hand. But he's a strong character because he's willing to sacrifice friendships, his music, and his prom date in order to stay true to himself, which is, of course, Radio Rebel's biggest message. In a way, the core themes of this movie relate to Gavin and his struggles more so than Tara's. Amid newfound fame, he goes through trials and tribulations of what the fame costs. He can either sell out and give the people what they want, or stay himself and risk that people won't like him for it. He's definitely believable as an out-of-nowhere popular kid with a true passion for music and is portrayed well, although I'm not sure his character is as difficult to pull off compared to the two leading ladies that we've discussed. Most of the other characters, they're not awful, but relatively unimpactful for me. Tara's friends don't really do too much. Atticus Mitchell as Gabe is solid, but has very limited screen time. Everyone else is pretty much there to just fill up a roster spot so that the leads have someone to exchange dialogue with. And that's Radio Rebel. So, how does it hold up? Radio Rebel is a great film that conveys their positive message in unique ways. In addition to having a great antagonist, the well-paced character arcs of both Tara and Gavin create two interesting and divergent perspectives that both tie into the larger theme of being true to yourself, despite how scary that can be. This movie is also, for the most part, very intelligent in the way they carry the story forward. There could have been so many ridiculous moments where the movie just faffs around until they can get to the big reveal, but it takes its time, properly sets up the characters and how the characters relate to each other before pulling off anything large scale. Most of the characters are still somewhat underutilized to that end, but they put the focus on the trio of lead characters and they delivered. Well acted, well paced, and has more than earned its spot on my all-time favorite DCOMs list. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, sub, and share this video, it really helps, and comment with what DCOM I should tackle next. Until then!